For decades, park rangers have warned visitors with a familiar refrain. Remember, you are not at the top of the food chain here. It was this delicate balance between human adventure and wild peril that would come to define the disappearance of Leah and Jason Keller. In the summer of 2008, a case that would haunt park officials, investigators, and loved ones for years. On the morning of June 12th, the day dawned clear and promising, the kind of perfect mountain day that draws thousands of visitors to America's crown jewel parks each season. Leah Keller, a 28-year-old pediatric nurse from Minneapolis, and her husband Jason, a 30-year-old software engineer, set out from the Logan Pass Visitor Center on a planned, 3-day backcountry trek to celebrate their second wedding anniversary. Friends would later describe them as experienced but cautious outdoor enthusiasts who had meticulously planned this trip for over a year. They weren't reckless people. Emma Dunham, Leah's sister, would later tell investigators. Jason had spreadsheets for his spreadsheets. Leah packed a first aid kit that could have stocked a small hospital. They respected the wilderness. The Kellers had obtained all proper permits, attended the mandatory safety briefing, and carried bear spray, the highly concentrated pepper spray that serves as the last line of defense against the park's approximately 300 grizzly bears. Their planned route along the Highline Trail and into the more remote Granite Park region was challenging but well established. They were expected to return and check out of their rented cabin at the park's eastern edge on June 15th. By the evening of June 16th, when the couple had failed to return or make contact, the cabin's property manager, Martin Owens, reported their absence to park authorities. The initial response was measured delays of a day or two were not uncommon for backcountry hikers who might decide to extend their trip or move at a slower pace than anticipated. "We don't immediately sound the alarm when folks are a bit late," explained Chief Ranger Carla Hernandez in a later press briefing. But by the morning of the 17th, with still no sign of them and their vehicle still in the visitor center lot, we initiated search protocols. What began as a routine response quickly escalated into one of the largest search operations in the park's history. By nightfall on June 17th, 3 search teams, each comprised of park rangers and volunteers from local search and rescue organizations, had begun systematically working through the Kellers' planned route. Helicopter surveillance was arranged for first light the following day. The first concerning discovery came just after noon on June 18th, when a search team located what appeared to be an abandoned campsite approximately 2 miles off the Highline Trail. A backpack later identified as Jason's was found hanging properly from a tree branch, standard protocol in grizzly country to prevent bears from accessing food. Inside the pack was the couple's permit, a half-empty water bottle, and a camera containing photos dated through the evening of June 13th, their second day in the backcountry. The final photos on the camera showed the couple smiling beside an alpine lake, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of orange and pink. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m. There were no more photos after that moment. The search intensified over the next 5 days, eventually involving more than 80 personnel, including specialized K-9 units, technical climbing teams, and thermal imaging equipment flown in from as far away as Colorado. The operation covered over 35 square miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain in the continental United States. On June 23rd, a discovery sent ripples of dread through the search teams. Approximately 400 yards downslope from the abandoned campsite, a search dog alerted to an item partially buried beneath forest debris. It was Leah's distinctive orange rain jacket, torn and stained with what forensic testing would later confirm was human blood. Nearby searchers found a single hiking boot, also identified as Leah's, its laces still tightly tied. Most disturbing was the condition of both items. The jacket showed clear signs of having been forcefully ripped, and the boot bore deep gouges consistent with powerful animal claws. Dr. Helena Morrison, the wildlife biologist called to examine the evidence, delivered her assessment with the grim certainty of someone who had seen similar cases before. These marking patterns are consistent with a large predator, most likely a grizzly bear, she stated in her preliminary report. The depth and spacing of the claw marks on the boot and the way the jacket has been torn rather than cut strongly suggests a defensive attack, the kind that occurs when a bear feels threatened or surprised. The blood evidence, while not extensive, told its own story. Small spatter patterns suggested an initial injury at the site where the items were found, followed by what analysts described as smeared drag patterns leading further into the dense forest. Despite intensive searching, the trail eventually disappeared in the rocky terrain beyond. By July 1st, 2 weeks after the Kellers had failed to return, the operation transitioned from rescue to recovery. The working theory, supported by both physical evidence and expert analysis, pointed to a tragic encounter with a grizzly bear likely a sow with cubs, based on several reported sightings in the area that season. Grizzly bears, particularly females with young, can perceive humans as threats even when no provocation occurs, Dr. Morrison explained during a somber press conference. While such fatal attacks are extremely rare, they do happen, and the pattern we're seeing here fits with documented cases from throughout the region's history. The theory gained further credence when a search team discovered what appeared to be a bear day bed, a depression in the earth where bears rest approximately 200 yards from where the clothing items were found. Fresh bear scat in the vicinity contained fabric fibers that would later be matched to the material of Jason's hiking pants. For the families of Leah and Jason Keller, the absence of bodies prevented the closure that might have come with a traditional funeral. Instead, after nearly a month of searching, park officials and law enforcement made the difficult decision to suspend active search operations, citing deteriorating weather conditions and the diminishing likelihood of recovery. The glacier backcountry is over 1 million acres of some of the most remote wilderness in America, explained Sheriff Daniel McIntyre of Flathead County. When someone becomes part of that wilderness, and I mean that in the most respectful way, sometimes nature simply doesn't give them back to us. A memorial service held in Minneapolis in August 2008 drew hundreds of mourners. Photos of the couple's adventures, hiking in Yosemite, kayaking in the Boundary Waters, camping under desert stars in Utah lined the walls of the funeral home. The Keller and Mitchell families, Leah's maiden name, established a foundation in the couple's memory, dedicated to wilderness education and bear conservation efforts. It might seem strange to some people that we'd want to protect the very creatures that we believe took our children from us, said Robert Mitchell, Leah's father, his voice steady despite his grief. But Leah and Jason understood something that too many visitors to our wild places don't. We are guests in their home, not the other way around. If their death prevents someone else's by raising awareness, then perhaps there's some meaning in this senseless tragedy. The case of the Kellers' disappearance might have faded into the sad statistics of wilderness fatalities, joining the handful of visitors lost to the park's natural hazards each decade. The narrative of a bear encounter gone tragically wrong provided a framework that, while heartbreaking, made sense within the context of wild nature and its inherent risks. For most officials involved, the file was effectively closed. Most, but not all. Park Ranger Ethan Walsh had been among the first search team members to reach the abandoned campsite. A 15-year veteran of the National Park Service with experience across 6 different parks, Walsh had seen his share of accidents, disappearances, and yes, animal attacks. Something about the Keller case refused to settle in his mind. The bear theory makes sense on paper, he confided to his field journal, a habit he'd maintained since his first days as a seasonal ranger in Yosemite. But I've worked bear incidents before. They're messy, chaotic. This feels ... I don't know ... arranged. Walsh's concerns began with the campsite itself. While Jason's pack had been properly hung, the couple's tent showed signs of having been hastily abandoned, sleeping bags still inside, Leah's smaller backpack unzipped with toiletries scattered. Yet there were no signs of a struggle at the immediate campsite, no blood evidence, no tracks or scat to suggest a bear had approached the tent itself. If they were attacked at night or early morning, where's the evidence at the primary scene? Walsh wrote. And if they were attacked elsewhere, why would only one of them have their pack properly secured back at camp? His questions earned him little more than sympathetic nods from colleagues who attributed his doubts to the natural frustration that comes with unresolved cases. The evidence pointing to a bear attack was, after all, compelling. By late summer of 2008, as the tourist season wound down and the first snow dusted the high country, Walsh found himself increasingly alone in his skepticism. In October 2008, a routine patrol by backcountry rangers discovered additional evidence that seemed to close the case definitively. A partial human femur, showing clear signs of animal scavenging, was found approximately 2 miles from the original search area. DNA testing would later confirm it belonged to Jason Keller. Adjacent to the bone, investigators discovered scraps of a thermal shirt consistent with the one Jason had been wearing in the last photographs. Dr. Morrison's assessment was unequivocal. The scatter pattern of remains and the scavenging marks are textbook signs of a large predator kill site. Bears often cache their food, sometimes moving remains considerable distances from the initial attack site, which explains why our initial search didn't locate these remains. The discovery prompted a brief, focused recovery effort, but early winter storms soon made the area inaccessible. The case file was officially classified as death by misadventure, specifically a wildlife attack. For most involved, this represented the final chapter in a tragic but straightforward wilderness accident. As Glacier National Park closed for the winter season, the story of Leah and Jason Keller became another cautionary tale shared during visitor safety briefings. Their foundation funded new educational materials about proper food storage and bear safety. The wilderness had claimed 2 more lives, regrettable, but within the understood risks of America's last wild places. For Ranger Walsh, now reassigned to winter duties at park headquarters, the discovery of Jason's remains should have put his doubts to rest. Instead, it only deepened them. The bone was found in an area we searched thoroughly in June, he noted in his increasingly detailed personal case notes. And it showed relatively fresh scavenging marks despite supposedly being there for 4 months. That doesn't track. Walsh began spending his off-duty hours reviewing the case files, collecting copies of photographs, reports, and evidence logs. His apartment wall gradually transformed into what his few visitors described as something from a detective show. Maps marked with color-coded pins, timeline charts, and weather data from the days surrounding the disappearance. What began as professional curiosity evolved into something more consuming. By December, Walsh had requested and been denied formal reopening of the investigation. His supervisor, sympathetic but firm, suggested he might benefit from counseling, a common recommendation for rangers who had experienced traumatic search and recovery operations. I understand how these cases can get under your skin, Ethan, Chief Ranger Hernandez told him during their year-end review. But you need to accept that sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. They had a bear encounter. It ended badly. Obsessing over alternative theories isn't healthy for you, and it doesn't honor their memory. Walsh nodded, promised to get his head straight over the winter, and was granted his requested assignment to avalanche monitoring for the season, a solitary role that would keep him largely in the field rather than at headquarters. What he didn't share was his growing file of inconsistencies. The weather data showing no significant precipitation between the couple's disappearance and the search, yet the campsite had appeared to have been exposed to moisture that couldn't be explained by morning dew alone. The strange absence of the couple's cooking equipment, which was neither at the campsite nor found in subsequent searches. The fact that despite finding blood evidence on Leah's jacket, cadaver dogs had never picked up scent trails consistent with fatal injuries. Most puzzling was the camera. The memory card contained 348 photos documenting the couple's journey from the trailhead through their second evening. But when Walsh examined the camera's properties, it showed storage space for 500 images. Were the missing 152 photos deleted? If so, by whom and why? These questions might have remained private obsessions, relegating Walsh to the familiar stereotype of the cop who couldn't let the case go had Winter not yielded its own unexpected discovery. In February 2009, a routine wildlife survey team tracking wolf movements through the park's winter landscape made a discovery that defied the established narrative. Approximately 6 miles from the Keller's last known location, in a remote drainage rarely accessed by summer visitors, a wolf monitoring camera captured images of what appeared to be a human figure moving through deep snow. The timestamp showed January 17, 2009, 7 months after the Kellers had vanished. The figure was distant, bundled against the cold, face obscured. But strapped to the person's back was a distinctive blue and gray backpack with a red diagonal stripe identical to the one Leah Keller had been carrying, which had never been recovered. When the survey team retrieved the camera's memory card during their February patrol and downloaded the images, the significance wasn't immediately apparent. It was only when the photographs reached headquarters that a clerical staff member who had assisted with cataloging the Keller's equipment recognized the backpack. The discovery landed on Walsh's desk on a bitter February morning. For the first time in months, the knot of certainty in his chest that something about the official explanation was fundamentally wrong found validation outside his own misgivings. "This changes everything," he told Hernandez, spreading the grainy photographs across her desk. "If that's Leah's pack, and it's being carried through the park in January, then we're not dealing with a bear attack. We're dealing with something else entirely." Hernandez studied the images with the careful scrutiny that had earned her reputation as one of the Park Service's most thorough investigators. "It's similar," she conceded, "but it could be coincidence. That's a common backpack design. Common enough to be in the same remote drainage where we found trace DNA evidence back in September," Walsh countered. 6 miles from their campsite, in terrain that would be challenging even for experienced backcountry travelers during winter closure? For the first time, Hernandez's certainty wavered. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ethan?" "I'm suggesting we may have missed something fundamental. I'm suggesting that what happened to the Kellers might not have had anything to do with wildlife at all." The revelation from the wildlife camera triggered a cascade of re-examinations. The case file, officially closed, was quietly reopened as an administrative review. Walsh found himself suddenly transformed, from office pariah to lead investigator, tasked with re-evaluating every piece of evidence in light of the new discovery. The first step was confirming whether the backpack in the photo was indeed Leah's. The Keller and Mitchell families provided additional photographs showing Leah wearing the pack on previous trips. More significantly, they confirmed a detail not listed in the original inventory: a small enamel pin of a mountain bluebird, given to Leah by a young cancer patient she had treated, which she had attached to the pack's top flap as a good luck charm. Digital enhancement of the wildlife camera images revealed a small blue spot exactly where the pin would have been. As winter grudgingly yielded to spring in the high country, the investigation took on new urgency. If someone had been moving through the park's backcountry in January with Leah's pack, who were they? And how did they acquire an item that should have been either with Leah or destroyed in the supposed bear attack? The answers would prove more disturbing than even Walsh's skeptical mind had imagined, unraveling a case that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of everyone involved and reveal that in some cases, the most dangerous predators in the wilderness walk on 2 legs, not 4. Spring arrived late to Glacier National Park in 2009. with snow lingering in the high passes well into May. The seasonal transformation mirrored the investigation itself, glacially slow, yet inexorable, revealing terrain that had been obscured for months. As access to the backcountry gradually opened, Ranger Ethan Walsh led a small, specialized team back to the drainage where the wildlife camera had captured the mysterious figure with Leah's backpack. The decision to reopen the case hadn't come without resistance. The original investigating team, the park administration, and even the local sheriff's office had invested considerable resources and professional reputation in the bear attack conclusion. Dr. Morrison, the wildlife biologist whose expert testimony had shaped the official narrative, expressed particular skepticism about Walsh's new theory. "I've examined thousands of predator incidents across 3 decades," she wrote in a formal response to the investigation reopening. The evidence at the Keller site displayed classic ursine predation patterns. While I respect Ranger Walsh's dedication, I caution against confirmation bias in interpreting new data. What Morrison and others couldn't dismiss, however, was the wildlife camera image. The statistical probability of an unrelated hiker carrying the exact same backpack model, with an identical decorative pin, through a remote section of the park during winter closure strained credibility beyond breaking point. Something or someone had survived the incident that claimed the Kellers' lives. Walsh's team established a base camp near the camera location in early June, methodically working outward in expanding search patterns. The area, a steep-sided valley rarely visited even during peak season, presented formidable challenges. Dense underbrush choked the lower elevations, while unstable talus slopes made the higher ground treacherous. It was precisely the kind of location someone might choose if they wished to avoid detection. 10 days into the search, the first breakthrough came in the form of an anomaly so subtle it might have been missed entirely under different circumstances. Approximately 2 miles downstream from the camera location, technical search specialist Mia Hawkins noticed what appeared to be cut branches among the natural deadfall near a small tributary creek. The cuts were weathered, but clearly made with a tool, not by animal activity or natural breakage, Hawkins noted in her field report. The pattern suggested deliberate clearing, just enough to create passage without leaving obvious signs of human presence. Following this nearly invisible trail, the team discovered a small clearing sheltered by a natural rock overhang. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared completely undisturbed. To wilderness experts, the signs were unmistakable. Compressed earth where a tent had stood, a subtle ring of stones that had contained small smokeless fires, and most significantly, a cache site. The cache, a wilderness storage technique used by backcountry travelers for food or spoor, equipment had been expertly constructed and recently emptied. But its creator had left behind a single crucial item, perhaps accidentally. A small prescription bottle, the label degraded by moisture but still partially legible. The name Keller J was clearly visible, along with a prescription date of May 2008, 1 month before the couple's disappearance. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigation team. Someone had been systematically using the Kellers' equipment in the months following their supposed death. More disturbing was the level of woodcraft on display. Whoever had established this camp possessed advanced wilderness skills and intimate knowledge of the park's most remote regions. "We're not dealing with opportunistic scavenging," Walsh told Hernandez during their secure satellite call that evening. "This was deliberate, planned, and executed with expertise. Someone wanted us to believe the Kellers died in a bear attack while systematically utilizing their gear." Hernandez's response was measured but resolute. "I'm authorizing expanded resources. If you're right, Ethan, this isn't just about solving a disappearance anymore. This could be a homicide investigation." As summer advanced, the case underwent a fundamental transformation. The physical evidence, once interpreted exclusively through the lens of animal predation, yielded very different conclusions when examined with human agency in mind. The forensics team revisited the blood evidence found on Leah's torn jacket. While the distribution initially appeared consistent with animal attack, closer analysis revealed patterns that could have been created artificially. More troubling was the discovery that while the blood contained Leah's DNA, its degradation level didn't match the timeline of her disappearance, suggesting it might have been from a minor injury sustained earlier and later used to stage the scene. The gouge marks on Leah's recovered boot, previously attributed to bear claws, were re-examined using 3D scanning technology. Dr. Eliza Richardson, a forensic anthropologist brought in from the FBI's Specialized Evidence Unit, delivered an assessment that appended the original conclusion. These marks were created with a manufactured tool, not an animal claw, she stated in her report. The uniform depth and consistent angle suggest a specialized implement, possibly a modified garden tool or climbing equipment used to simulate predator marks. With each revelation, the investigation's focus narrowed from the vastness of wilderness accident to the intimate sphere of human relationships. Who would have both the motive to harm the Kellers and the specialized knowledge to stage their disappearance so convincingly? The answer began to emerge from an overlooked detail in the couple's background. In their initial permit application, the Kellers had listed a third person who might be joining them for a portion of their trek, a college friend of Jason's named Marcus Blackwood, described as an experienced backcountry guide. When Blackwood never appeared at the trailhead, investigators had removed him from their inquiry, assuming he had simply changed his plans. Walsh's team discovered that Blackwood had indeed been in Glacier during the critical period, working as a seasonal guide for Pinnacle Wilderness Expeditions, a high-end outfitter operating just outside the park's western boundary. His employment records showed him leading a group until June 10th, followed by 3 days of approved personal time days that aligned perfectly with the Kellers' disappearance. Blackwood's background revealed a complex connection to the couple. He and Jason had been roommates at the University of Minnesota, where they'd bonded over shared outdoor interests. Social media archives and interviews with mutual friends painted a picture of a close-knit trio: Jason, Leah, and Marcus, who had taken numerous wilderness trips together over the years. They were inseparable for a while, recalled Sean Donovan, another college friend. Then things got weird after Jason and Leah started dating. Marcus stayed in their orbit, but something had changed. The dynamic was off. When investigators finally located Blackwood in July 2009, he was leading expeditions in Alaska's Denali National Park. His initial reaction to questioning about the Kellers struck the interviewing rangers as oddly detached. "Of course I was devastated when I heard," he stated, his expression neutral behind mirrored sunglasses. "Jason was like a brother to me. I still can't believe they ran into a grizzly like that. Just bad luck, I guess. The mountains don't care how prepared you are." When pressed about his whereabouts during his personal days in June 2008, Blackwood provided a detailed account of a solo trek on the opposite side of the park from the Kellers, a trip for which he had no witnesses, photographs, or verification. More concerning was his reaction when shown the enhanced wildlife camera image. "That could be anyone," he said, voice steady but fingers tapping rapidly against his thigh. "That's a North Face Overhaul 40. They sold thousands of them that season, and you can barely make out whatever pin or badge you're talking about in that grainy shot." The fact that Blackwood had identified the exact backpack model without prompting information not volunteered by the investigators raised immediate red flags. A search warrant for his current residence in Bozeman, Montana, yielded no physical evidence connecting him to the Kellers' disappearance, but his digital footprint told a different story. Forensic analysis of Blackwood's laptop revealed he had conducted numerous searches related to the case in the weeks before the Kellers' trip. Grizzly attack patterns, wilderness disappearances, decomposition rates at high elevation, and most damning, untraceable wilderness homicide. These searches had been conducted using privacy software designed to mask his digital trail, but the specialized FBI technicians had recovered fragments from his hard drive. By August 2009, the investigation had gathered sufficient circumstantial evidence to designate Blackwood as a person of interest, though not yet enough for an arrest warrant. Surveillance was established. His movements tracked through the wilderness guiding community where he maintained his livelihood. What investigators couldn't determine was motive. What would drive a seemingly successful outdoor professional to harm two people described as his closest friends? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. Among the items recovered from the Kellers' abandoned campsite was a journal belonging to Leah, containing mostly trip notes and nature observations. When Walsh revisited this evidence, he noticed faint indentations on several pages, impressions left from writing on previous pages that had been torn out. Forensic document analysis revealed fragments of what appeared to be a deeply personal entry. Though incomplete, the recovered text painted a disturbing picture. ... told Marcus again that he needs to accept our decision. Becoming obsessive ... Jason thinks we should cancel the glacier trip, but I don't want to let fear rule our lives ... Promised this would be the last time we'd all ... double quotes. The journal fragments aligned with digital evidence recovered from Leah's cloud storage, emails and text messages suggesting a pattern of increasingly concerning behavior from Blackwood toward the couple. Friends confirmed that Blackwood had grown possessive of his relationship with them, particularly with Leah. There was always something off about how Marcus acted around them. Emma Dunham, Leah's sister, told investigators. He'd insert himself into their plans, show up unexpectedly. Leah mentioned once that he'd make comments about how she and Jason wouldn't last, how she'd eventually realize she belonged with someone who truly understood her connection to the wilderness. The psychological profile that emerged suggested an obsessive personality who had developed an unhealthy fixation on Leah, viewing Jason as an obstacle rather than a friend. Investigators theorized that the glacier trip, remote, isolated, in terrain where Blackwood possessed superior knowledge and experience, presented the perfect opportunity to eliminate Jason and potentially force a scenario where Leah would become dependent on him for survival. What remained unclear was the full sequence of events at the campsite and, more crucially, Leah's fate. The physical evidence confirmed Jason's death, but nothing definitively proved Leah had been killed. The wildlife camera image suggested the possibility, however remote, that she might have survived the initial incident. In September 2009, as autumn painted Glacier's high country in gold and crimson, the investigation faced a critical juncture. Blackwood, perhaps sensing the tightening net, suddenly resigned from his guiding position and disappeared from his Bozeman residence, leaving behind most of his possessions. Credit card records traced him to Seattle, where he purchased supplies consistent with long-term backcountry travel before his trail went cold. The development forced Walsh's hand. With Blackwood potentially fleeing into the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, the investigation went public. A carefully worded press release announced that the Keller case had been reopened based on new evidence and that authorities were seeking Marcus Blackwood for questioning. The release included the enhanced wildlife camera image and a recent photograph of Blackwood, along with a hotline number. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. The story, with its elements of wilderness danger, betrayal, and potential survival against all odds, captured public imagination. National news outlets ran feature segments questioning the original bear attack conclusion and speculating about Leah's possible survival. Internet forums filled with amateur sleuths analyzing every available piece of evidence. For the families who had spent 15 months grieving what they believed was a tragic accident, the revelations were emotionally shattering. To learn that someone Jason trusted might have orchestrated this, it's almost harder than believing it was just nature taking its course. Jason's mother told reporters, her voice breaking, "At least with a bear, There's no malice, no betrayal. This feels like losing him all over again. The renewed attention yielded results. Tips flooded the hotline, most speculative or unhelpful, but 3 independent reports placed someone matching Blackwood's description in the remote Pasayten wilderness along the Washington-Canada border. The vast, roadless area, over 500,000 acres of rugged mountains and dense forests, represented a formidable search challenge, but also suggested Blackwood was following a pattern of seeking refuge in the type of terrain where he felt most comfortable. As fall deepened, the investigation consolidated around 2 parallel objectives: building a case strong enough to support homicide charges, and locating either Blackwood or evidence of Leah's fate. The latter took precedence as winter approached, threatening to once again lock the high country under snow and ice until the following spring. In October 2009, the search received unexpected assistance from an unlikely alliance of wilderness experts, professional guides, search and rescue volunteers, and experienced backcountry hunters who knew the Pasayten's remote corners intimately. Operating with official blessing but largely self-organized, these teams methodically combed promising areas, communicating findings through a coordinated network. On October 23rd, a hunting guide named Ray Sutherland radioed in a discovery that electrified the investigation. In a remote basin nearly 30 miles from the nearest road, Sutherland had found an abandoned camp showing signs of recent occupation. Among the items recovered was a weathered leather camera strap with the initials LKM burned into the underside. Leah Keller Mitchell's. Walsh and a specialized team were helicoptered to the location within hours. The camp showed signs of hasty departure, food supplies partially packed, sleeping arrangements disturbed. Most significant was a small journal hidden beneath a rock at the campsite's edge, wrapped carefully in waterproof material. The journal, written in what document experts would confirm was Leah's handwriting, contained entries dating from June 2008 through October 2009, 16 months after her supposed death. The early entries documented a nightmare beyond what even Walsh had imagined. He came to our camp the second night, acting strange, agitated, she had written in shaky script. Jason tried to calm him down. They went to gather more firewood, and Marcus came back alone, covered in blood, saying there had been an accident, that Jason had fallen from the ridge. I knew immediately he was lying. I ran, but he caught me near the creek. The journal described how Blackwood had subdued her, initially keeping her bound while claiming he was protecting her from authorities, who would blame her for Jason's death. Over weeks, he had moved her repeatedly through the park's most isolated regions, using his wilderness skills to avoid detection, gradually attempting to manipulate her into accepting a narrative where they would eventually emerge together. Her rescued by him after a tragic accident claimed her husband. The psychological tactics documented in the journal pages revealed calculated abuse, isolation, intermittent kindness followed by threats, and constant reminders that he alone stood between her and death in the wilderness. What Blackwood hadn't anticipated was Leah's psychological resilience and her own considerable outdoor skills. The final dated entry, from just 3 days before the camp's discovery, contained a single line: "He's growing careless. The hunting parties are making him nervous. I'll have my chance soon." The journal ended there, with no indication of where Leah might have fled or whether she had successfully escaped Blackwood's control. But it provided something the investigation had been missing: definitive proof that Leah had survived the initial attack and had been held against her will for over a year. The manhunt intensified, now with dual urgency: finding Blackwood before he could flee the country or harm others, and locating Leah, whose survival against extraordinary odds had transformed the case from tragedy to potential triumph. As the first significant snowfall dusted the high peaks of the Pasayten in early November, the investigation entered perhaps its most critical phase. Somewhere in the vast wilderness, a predator was being hunted. But unlike the bears initially blamed for the Kellers' disappearance, this predator possessed human intelligence, wilderness expertise, and the desperate motivation of a man with nothing left to lose. Most concerning to Walsh and the expanded investigative team was the question that had haunted them since discovering the journal. If Leah had indeed escaped after 16 months of captivity, where was she now? And in the unforgiving early winter of the Northern Cascades, could she survive long enough to be found? The North Cascades in November represent one of the most formidable environments in the continental United States. Temperatures routinely plunge below freezing, daylight dwindles to brief windows, and storms materialize with little warning, transforming passable terrain into death traps within hours. For the multi-agency search operation now focused on the Pasayten Wilderness, these conditions created a merciless countdown. We're looking at a 10-day window, maximum, before the high country becomes essentially inaccessible until spring, explained Search Coordinator Samantha Reed during the November 2nd briefing. If Blackwood or Leah remain up there after that point, survival probabilities drop dramatically, even for someone with advanced skills. The search had evolved into an unprecedented operation, combining federal resources from the FBI, National Park Service, and Border Patrol with local expertise from search and rescue organizations across 3 states. Thermal imaging flights scanned remote basins each night, while ground teams methodically cleared drainages and valleys, working outward from the abandoned camp where Leah's journal had been discovered. Walsh, now operating as liaison between federal authorities and local resources, found himself in the uncomfortable position of media spokesperson. The story had captivated national attention, with daily press briefings broadcast live and endless speculation filling the 24-hour news cycle. For a career ranger accustomed to the solitude of backcountry patrols, the scrutiny was almost as challenging as the search itself. We remain cautiously optimistic about Ms. Keller's survival prospects, he stated during one such briefing, choosing words with painful care. The journal indicates she possessed both the skills and determination to endure extraordinary circumstances. However, we're also aware that Mr. Blackwood represents a continuing threat, not only to her but potentially to others in the region. What Walsh couldn't share publicly was the psychological assessment developed by FBI specialists. Based on Leah's journal and Blackwood's digital history, the profile painted a disturbing picture of escalating obsession and capacity for violence. If Blackwood realized Leah had escaped his control and might reach authorities, experts believed he would pursue her relentlessly, either to recapture her or ensure her silence permanently. On November 5th, the investigation received what appeared to be its first substantial break. A remote game camera installed by state wildlife biologists captured images of a solitary figure moving through heavy timber, approximately 12 miles northwest of the abandoned camp. Though the figure's face wasn't visible, the physical build and distinctive gait matched Blackwood's. Most telling was the equipment visible in the images, a backpack configuration, consistent with extended wilderness travel and what appeared to be a rifle or shotgun carried across the chest in a hunting harness. The direction of travel suggested Blackwood might be attempting to reach the Canadian border, just 18 miles further north. Surveillance was immediately intensified along likely crossing points, with Canadian authorities establishing their own containment perimeter on the northern side. For the first time, Walsh allowed himself to believe they might actually apprehend the man who had engineered one of the most sophisticated wilderness crimes in recent history. However, nature intervened with brutal timing. On November 7th, a powerful winter storm system descended on the North Cascades, bringing heavy snow, 60 mph winds, and temperatures plunging to single digits. Aircraft were grounded. Electronic surveillance systems failed in the extreme conditions, and ground teams were forced to retreat to lower elevations for safety. The wilderness effectively sealed itself, providing Blackwood with exactly the conditions a skilled outdoorsman might exploit to escape. For 3 agonizing days, the operation remained in weather-imposed limbo, maintaining perimeter positions but unable to actively pursue their target. The Keller and Mitchell families, who had maintained a vigil at the command center established in the town of Winthrop, weathered the delay with remarkable composure. Leah's father Robert became a daily presence in the communications room, studying maps and offering insights about his daughter's wilderness experience and decision-making tendencies. "If she's free and mobile, she won't go up," he explained to Walsh during one late-night strategy session, pointing to the high ridgelines that form the spine of the Pasayten. Leah always respected winter in the mountains. She'd follow water downhill, stick to south-facing slopes for better travel and more reliable food sources. This intimate knowledge proved invaluable when operations resumed on November 11th, allowing search teams to prioritize the most probable routes Leah might have taken if indeed she had escaped Blackwood's control. The storm had transformed the landscape, burying much of the high country under 2 feet of snow while leaving lower valleys navigable. This new topography created both challenges and opportunities for the search. "Fresh snow gives us tracking advantages," Walsh explained to his team during the resumption briefing. "Anyone moving through this landscape is leaving a readable story for those who know what to look for. Our challenge is distinguishing human sign from animal movement and determining age of tracks in areas where wind has affected snow deposition." The strategy proved effective sooner than anyone anticipated. On the morning of November 12th, an experienced tracking team led by a Colville tribal member named Thomas Redfeather discovered distinctive prints in a sheltered drainage 6 miles east of the last confirmed Blackwood sighting. The tracks showed a person of smaller stature moving deliberately downhill, occasionally using tree wells for shelter, exactly the pattern Robert Mitchell had predicted his daughter might follow. Most significant was a discovery at one of these rest sites, a strip of fabric tied to a branch in a simple overhand knot, positioned at eye level where someone following the drainage would notice it. The fabric matched the description of a shirt documented in Leah's journal, modified for cold weather survival. It wasn't merely a sign of passage but a deliberate marker, someone wanting to be found. Walsh, alerted by satellite phone, immediately redirected resources to the drainage while maintaining surveillance on Blackwood's last known trajectory. If both Leah and her captor were moving through the wilderness independently, the search had transformed into something far more complex, a 3-way dynamic where rescuers raced to reach a survivor before her pursuer could. The tracking team maintained an agonizing discipline, moving carefully enough to read the subtle story written in snow and disturbed vegetation without losing valuable time. By mid-afternoon, they had covered nearly 4 miles of challenging terrain, the tracks becoming fresher and more defined with each hour. At a small stream crossing, they found their most promising sign yet: fresh boot prints in mud, partially filled with water but not yet frozen over, suggesting passage within the past few hours. As dusk approached, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, Redfeather halted the team at the edge of a small clearing. "Someone's watching us from that stand of firs," he said quietly, gesturing almost imperceptibly toward a dense pocket of trees 80 yards ahead. "Been pacing us for the last quarter mile. Too deliberate for animal movement." Walsh, who had joined the tracking team after being helicoptered to their location, studied the tree line through binoculars. The fading light revealed nothing obvious, but he trusted Redfeather's assessment implicitly. If someone was indeed observing them, it could be either Leah or Blackwood, with radically different implications for how they should proceed. The decision was made to establish a visible camp, making no attempt to conceal their presence or numbers. If Leah was watching, they wanted to present themselves clearly as rescuers. If it was Blackwood, they hoped to project enough force to deter any aggressive action. As darkness settled over the drainage, the team maintained a relaxed but vigilant posture, conversations carried out at normal volume around a small cooking fire. Shortly after midnight, their strategy yielded results. A voice female, hoarse from disuse or exposure, called from the darkness beyond their perimeter. If you really search and rescue, prove it. Name the cache site where you found my journal. Walsh recognized the voice immediately despite its weathered quality. Northeast Basin below Ptarmigan Peak, he called back. The journal was wrapped in a Gore-Tex stuff sack under a flat rock beside a white pine. We also found your camera strap with the initials LKM. A long silence followed, heavy with evaluation. Then the sound of movement, cautious but determined. From the shadows emerged a figure so transformed from the smiling woman in the search photographs that several team members failed to recognize her. Leah Keller had survived, but at visible cost. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone conserving every calorie, her frame gaunt beneath layers of improvised clothing. Her hair had been roughly cut short, her skin weathered to a leathery texture by months of exposure. But her eyes remained startlingly alert, scanning each team member methodically before settling on Walsh. "You're the ranger," she said, recognition dawning. "The one who found our campsite last year. I saw you during the initial search, though you never saw me. He made me watch from hiding while you all looked right past us." The revelation sent a chill through Walsh that had nothing to do with the November air. The thought that he had been mere yards from the missing woman, separated only by Blackwood's wilderness craft and her forced silence, would haunt him long after the case concluded. Medical personnel immediately began treating Leah for exposure and malnutrition, while she briefed Walsh and the FBI agent present on her immediate concerns. Her account emerged in practical fragments, prioritizing tactical information over emotional processing. "He's 2 days behind me, maybe less now," she explained, accepting a thermal wrap and hot liquid with shaking hands. "I managed to slip away during the storm when he was checking his traps. Took his secondary pack with emergency supplies, but couldn't risk taking weapons or electronics. He'll be tracking me systematically. It's what he does, what he's always done. He won't stop." When asked how she had survived the 16 months since her disappearance, Leah's expression hardened into something between pride and trauma. At first, pure survival. "He kept me restrained whenever we camped, but needed me mobile during travel. I complied outwardly while documenting everything mentally. Memorized landmarks, cached small items when possible. Applied everything my father taught me about wilderness survival, everything I learned as a nurse about human psychology. Recognized that outright resistance would get me killed, so I played a longer game. The psychological fortitude required for such sustained performance under life-threatening conditions astounded even the veteran FBI personnel. More remarkable still was Leah's clarity about her current situation despite her physical condition. "You need to evacuate me immediately. Not for my safety, but because I'm the bait," she stated, her clinical assessment belying the horror of her words. "Marcus's entire fantasy depends on possessing me. Now that I've escaped, his only remaining option is to recapture me or ensure I can't testify against him. As long as I'm in these mountains, search teams are in danger." Her assessment aligned perfectly with the FBI's psychological profile. While emergency medical personnel prepared Leah for helicopter evacuation at first light, the operation shifted focus from search and rescue to manhunt. Tactical teams with specialized wilderness training were deployed to establish containment positions along likely approach routes, working under the assumption that Blackwood was actively tracking both Leah and her rescuers. Dawn brought clearing skies and the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors as the medical evacuation team arrived. Leah, somewhat stabilized after hours of treatment, provided a final, crucial piece of information before being airlifted out. "There's a fallback cabin he maintained about 9 miles northwest of his last hunting camp. Stone chimney, partially collapsed roof, set into a hillside for concealment. He cached weapons and supplies there, called it his contingency plan. If he feels cornered, that's where he'll go to ground." This intelligence proved prescient. By mid-morning, tracking teams discovered fresh sign indicating a single individual moving at high speed toward precisely the northwestern quadrant Leah had identified. The tracks showed someone no longer attempting to conceal their passage but instead prioritizing speed, the movement pattern of someone with urgent purpose. Tactical teams converged on the general area by early afternoon, establishing a perimeter around the drainage where the cabin was likely located. Thermal imaging flights identified a heat signature consistent with a small structure nestled into a hillside, nearly invisible beneath conifer coverage and accumulated snow. By late afternoon, specialized FBI tactical units had established observation positions, confirming the presence of a crude cabin with a single occupant inside. What followed would later be described in official reports as a contained negotiation and apprehension, but the reality proved far more tense. For nearly 6 hours, federal negotiators attempted to establish communication with Blackwood, receiving only silence in return. Thermal imaging showed him moving within the confined space, but he remained unresponsive to calls over loudspeaker or attempts at direct communication. As darkness fell and temperatures dropped toward single digits, the tactical commander made the decision to advance. The operation that unfolded involved coordinated approaches from multiple angles, using terrain and darkness for concealment. At 8:17 p.m., entry teams breached the cabin simultaneously from 2 positions. They found Marcus Blackwood seated calmly in the cabin's single room, a hunting rifle across his lap, surrounded by wilderness gear that investigation would later confirm belonged to the Kellers. He offered no resistance, surrendering without speaking a word. The only statement he made during his entire apprehension was a question, asked with unsettling serenity as he was led to the transport helicopter. "Is she still alive?" Leah Keller's medical evacuation had delivered her to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, where specialists in trauma, exposure, and malnutrition began the process of addressing 16 months of physical hardship. Her condition, while serious, was remarkably stable given her ordeal. Doctors attributed her survival to a combination of excellent baseline health, medical knowledge that allowed her to self-monitor and address developing conditions, and extraordinary psychological resilience. The reunification with her family occurred under carefully managed conditions, with trauma specialists present to help navigate the overwhelming emotions for all involved. Robert Mitchell, who had maintained unwavering faith in his daughter's survival when others counseled acceptance of her presumed death, was the first to enter her hospital room. "I knew," he said simply, folding his daughter's thin frame into a gentle embrace. "I knew you'd find a way back to us." In the days that followed, as Leah's strength gradually returned, she provided investigators with detailed accounts of the 16-month ordeal. The picture that emerged was one of calculated predation disguised as friendship, extending back years before the glacier trip. Blackwood, it became clear, had harbored obsessive fixations on Leah since their college days, viewing her relationship and subsequent marriage to Jason as a personal betrayal. The planning revealed in his journals and digital records, recovered from various caches following his arrest, demonstrated a level of premeditation that prosecutors would later describe as coldly methodical. For at least a year before the glacier trip, Blackwood had been researching wilderness disappearances, animal attack patterns, and methods for staging crime scenes to misdirect investigation. The attack itself had unfolded much as Leah's journal described. Blackwood had accompanied the couple for their first day on trail, then departed, only to circle back and approach their camp on the second evening. After luring Jason away from camp, he had ambushed him near a ravine, striking him with a climbing tool modified to leave marks resembling bear claws. When Leah attempted to flee, he had subdued her using wilderness survival restraint techniques taught in the very guiding courses they had once taken together. What followed was a harrowing odyssey through Glacier's most remote regions, with Blackwood systematically destroying evidence while creating a false trail suggesting bear predation. He had placed Jason's remains where scavengers would accelerate decomposition, planted blood evidence from minor injuries Leah had sustained earlier in their trip, and even scattered personal items in patterns consistent with animal dispersal. Most disturbing was the psychological component of his crime. Journals recovered from his various caches revealed a detailed strategy for what he termed wilderness reconditioning, a systematic program to break down Leah's identity and resistance through isolation, controlled deprivation, and manufactured dependency. He believed if he could keep me isolated long enough, I would eventually accept a new reality where he was my protector and partner, Leah explained during a formal deposition. He had constructed an entire alternative narrative where he had rescued me after Jason's tragic accident, and we were hiding from authorities who would falsely blame us for Jason's death. This psychological manipulation extended to carefully orchestrated incidents where Blackwood would leave Leah restrained in camp, then return claiming to have narrowly diverted search parties, reinforcing the idea that discovery meant danger rather than rescue. During winter months, when survival required more substantial shelter, he had moved her between remote cabins and caves, always in isolated areas where encounter with other humans was virtually impossible. The case against Marcus Blackwood proceeded through the federal justice system with methodical thoroughness. Charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and a host of related offenses, he maintained an eerie composure throughout proceedings. Psychiatric evaluation revealed a personality pathology combining narcissistic and antisocial features with an unusual fixation on wilderness skills as markers of superior worth and identity. In January 2011, after a trial that captivated public attention for its window into both the darkest aspects of human obsession and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, Blackwood was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The judge, in her remarks, noted that the case represented a predatory calculation rarely seen outside of fictional accounts, carried out with a wilderness expertise that nearly achieved the perfect crime. For Leah Keller, the years following her rescue involved a gradual reclamation of identity and autonomy. Physical recovery came relatively quickly. Psychological healing proved more complex. Yet with specialized trauma therapy and the steadfast support of family, she began rebuilding a life defined by her own choices rather than her victimization. In a decision that surprised many, Leah chose to become an advocate for wilderness safety and survival education, eventually establishing a foundation in Jason's memory that provided specialized training for park rangers in recognizing the difference between animal predation and staged wilderness crime scenes. The curriculum, developed in collaboration with Walsh and other experts who had worked the case, became standard training across the National Park Service. The wilderness itself was never my enemy, she explained during a rare media appearance 3 years after her rescue. What happened to Jason and me wasn't the mountain's doing. It was entirely human. I refused to surrender my connection to wild places because of one person's capacity for evil. For Ranger Ethan Walsh, the Keller case represented both professional vindication and personal transformation. His promotion to head a specialized NPS investigative unit focusing on backcountry crimes stemmed directly from his work on the case, particularly his willingness to question established narratives when evidence suggested alternative explanations. The investigation fundamentally changed how wilderness disappearances were approached throughout the national park system. No longer were animal predation theories accepted without rigorous examination of all evidence. Walsh's insistence on multidisciplinary forensic analysis combining traditional wilderness tracking with modern investigative techniques became standard protocol for complex backcountry cases. Perhaps the most profound impact, however, was in how the case altered public perception of wilderness danger. For decades, Popular culture had fixated on the primal fears of animal attacks and natural disasters: the bear, the avalanche, the lightning strike. The Keller case revealed a more nuanced truth, that even in our most remote wild places, the most dangerous predator remains human. This reality, while sobering, contained its own strange comfort. Nature, for all its power, operates without malice or deception. The grizzly bear, initially blamed for the Kellers' disappearance, was simply a convenient scapegoat, one that couldn't defend itself against accusation, couldn't reveal the elaborate human calculation behind what had appeared to be wilderness tragedy. In the final analysis, the case had never truly been about the wilderness at all. It had instead revealed how human pathology could weaponize our perceptions of wild places, exploiting our readiness to attribute to nature what was, in truth, a calculated act of human predation. The bears of Glacier National Park, once cast as villains in the narrative, were ultimately revealed as innocent bystanders in a drama entirely of human making. In this light, the true story of Leah and Jason Keller was not one of humanity versus wilderness, but of humanity confronting its own capacity for both extraordinary evil and remarkable resilience. The mountains had merely provided the stage upon which this human drama played out in different witnesses to both the darkest and brightest capabilities of the species that so briefly passes through their ancient realm.